All right, and welcome while we read about the Nullification Crisis, which, if you remember, was a sectional political crisis which occurred from 1832 to 1833. If I was going to simplify this, I would basically say this. The Nullification Crisis starts with the Tariff of Abominations. The Tariff of Abominations, if you remember, was a tax on foreign goods, but it rose taxes up to 45%. So you're basically going to have to pay, something cost $5, now you're paying $7.50 for it instantly, and the money was just going to go to the government. Um, because of this, John C. Calhoun and a lot of people wrote essays, secret, anonymous, because they were going to be unpopular, especially among the governing class. And what they said was that states, they were countries before becoming the United States. When they were colonies, they were 13 different countries that just happened to want to work together to defeat Great Britain in the American Revolutionary War. So because they all used to be countries, they had some rights out of that. And these rights had been set forth first in Jefferson and James Madison's Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which, if you remember, they put forth the idea of nullification. And Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence. He's the third president of the United States. James Madison wrote the Constitution itself and was a president himself. And those guys said that the states should be able to nullify federal law because it is the state's primary responsibility to protect their citizen from unconstitutional laws from the federal government. And remember, that was all before Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court just magically gave themselves those powers. And don't forget that nullification, in the long run, when we actually get to the Civil War, is going to equal secession. 1930, you have John C. Calhoun and you have Andrew Jackson sitting down at a party at a dinner, and Jackson gets up and gives a toast, and it's like, to this country, blah blah blah. The big point is the country needs to stay together, and that's the big picture. And John C. Calhoun basically stands up and gives his own toast. It's like, the most important thing is actually the states and the people in those states. And so there's lots of tension, made it in the newspapers, very famous. There is a compromise tariff that lowers tax rates back down to the previous rates, and that's the compromise tariff of 1833. That really calmed things down. But what stuck in the mind of people was a lot of times was the force bill, which was a bill passed by the Congress giving Andrew Jackson the ability to go down to South Carolina and literally just hang traitors if he wanted to. Like, Jackson literally threatened to hang John C. Calhoun, his former vice president, over this whole thing. And when we get to the American Civil War, the nullification crisis, the tariff of abominations, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, those are all going to be reasons why the South says we have the right to do this. And those are going to be reasons why when they lose the Civil War, they're going to say, we lost, but we were morally right. And of course, the North is going to look at them and say, you were morally right? You, you know that all of this, the cotton you were mad about, all of this stuff, everything was all connected to slavery, right? So, morally right? I don't know. But different points of view. So, let's get to the reading. We've done a little enough rambling. So, the U.S. suffered an economic downturn throughout the 1820s, and South Carolina was very affected by this. Many politicians of South Carolina blamed the change in fortunes on the national tariff policy that developed after the War of 1812 to promote American manufacturing over its European competition, primarily in Great Britain. The controversial and highly protective Tariff of 1828, more famously known as the Tariff of Abominations, was made law during the presidency of John Quincy Adams, at the very, very end of it. The tariff was strongly opposed in the South as it was seen to put an unfair tax burden on the South that imported most manufactured goods. And this was very true of South Carolina. They made most of their money by selling cotton, and then they had to buy everything else because they spent all their time growing cotton. And by that, I mean they made their slaves grow the cotton. And they spent the money. The tariff's opponents expected that the election of Jackson as president would result in the tariff being significantly reduced. When Jackson failed to help them, the most radical faction in the state began to say that the state itself should declare the tariff null and void within nullification. Nullification. Within South Carolina, you should be able to say this law is unconstitutional in South Carolina. Anywhere else, it's fine, but here, no. In Washington, D.C., an open and public split on the issue occurred between Jackson and Vice President John C. Calhoun, who himself was a native South Carolinian, and the most effective proponent, the person who advertises for the idea of the theory of state nullification, which, don't forget, nullification is the legal theory that if a state believed a federal law unconstitutional, it could just declare that law powerless in that state. On July 14, 1832, Jackson signed the Tariff of 1832. This compromise tariff received the support of most Northerners and half of the Southerners in Congress. The reductions weren't enough for South Carolina, and on November 24, 1832, it adopted the Ordinance of Nullification, which declared that the tariffs of 1832 and 1828 were unenforceable in South Carolina after February 1st of 1833. South Carolina began military preparations to resist anticipated federal enforcement. However, on March 1st, 1833, Congress passed both the Force Bill, which authorized the president to use military force against South Carolina, and a new negotiated tariff, the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which was satisfactory to South Carolina. Basically what happens is the federal government passes two laws. One, hey, we have the ability to go down and murder everybody who disagrees with us. B, here is a compromise. You can either accept this compromise, or A, we will go down there and murder anybody who disagrees with us. Take your pick. And South Carolina agreed with the compromise because, oddly enough, none of the other states were like, yeah, we want to join you. No. South Carolina repealed its nullification ordinance on March 15th, but later nullified the Force Bill as a symbolic gesture to maintain its principles. The crisis was over, and both sides could find reason to claim victory. The tariff rates were reduced and stayed low to the satisfaction of the South, but nullification remained controversial. And this states' right issue is going to intensify in the decades after and culminate in the American Civil War, meaning that the nullification crisis, at least from the Southern perspective, is one of the major causes of the American Civil War. Hope you're learning, and I hope you're having fun.